Today's program, Berlin, the History and Highlights of a Great City, is being presented by Mariya Fogarasi. This presentation focuses on the history and favorite highlights of a fascinating city that has joined other major European capitals as a must-see, and it honors the 80th anniversary of its World War II capitulation on May 8th, 2025. So you'll hear about that. Also, Mariya has lived in Germany on 4 different occasions for a total of 29 years, including, and most recently, 10 years in Berlin specifically, where she hosted countless guests and loved giving city tours. She also served on the board of the Berlin Historical Association. This presentation is being live streamed, and it will have a Q&A at the end. So save your questions until the end, and then I'll pass around this mic so you can ask your question to Mariya into this mic. That way folks at home can hear. All right, so now let's join me in welcoming Mariya to the podium for her presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Can everyone hear me? This is the third talk I've given in Ann Arbor. The first one, I think, was way back in 2017 about Budapest, the capital of Hungary. And then the second one was about Bulgaria. And this one is about Berlin. And yes, I was very fortunate to live in Berlin for 10 years. I had lived in Germany previously and met my husband in Dusseldorf, which is on the Rhine River, when he was with the American consulate. And at that time, our U.S. embassy would have been in Bonn. Bonn was the capital. And then when we were married and came back to Germany in 2002, he came back as the commercial minister in the U.S. Embassy, not with the State Department, but with the Department of Commerce, so responsible for promoting and supporting U.S. trade wherever he was posted. And we were in Berlin from 2002 to 2006, and then we went to Seoul, Korea for 4 years, and then we came right back into the same house, and he came back into the same job in Berlin. So it was very interesting because we went from a city and country that had been divided to a country that is still divided. And so when I was in Korea, I actually first made this talk for some high school students who were taking AP US History. And then I've modified it, and I've just been giving it ever since. So very fortunate to spend 10 years in Berlin. And I always open with the slide of the Brandenburg Gate, which is symbolic of reunited Germany and reunited Berlin. It was commissioned in 1789 by Friedrich Wilhelm II and was finished about 2 years later. You have to know that Germany has 16 states, and 3 of them are city-states, and Berlin is one of the city-states. So Berlin is literally surrounded by the state of Brandenburg. It's the hole in the donut. And so way back when, this would have been a gate leading out to the town of Brandenburg in the state of Brandenburg. But when Friedrich Wilhelm commissioned it, he wasn't just commissioning a city gate, but he was commissioning something that was showing Prussian pride and Prussian political might. And I think he achieved that with the architecture and the neoclassical design and the Doric columns. And it looks particularly beautiful here with the lights on it. So you'll hear a lot about the Brandenburg Gate in my talk. I do deviate twice, and I'll tell you when those slides come up. But we're talking about reunited Germany here. And this is, of course, Berlin here, the star. Berlin was not allowed to be the capital of Germany anymore after World War II. Germany was defeated. It was out of the question, and eventually, as we know, Germany became divided between East and West in 1949. West Germany and East Germany were officially created. But after the war, the Allies, meaning our allies, meaning the Soviet Union and Great Britain, and to a lesser extent France, but the Vichy government in Paris was complicit with the Nazi Party, so they weren't really included in the post-war discussions. But West Germany needed a capital, and so there were 4 cities that were vying for the honor, and one of them was Bonn, which is over here, just on the Rhine River, and just south of Cologne, which has the very famous cathedral. And up until that time, Bonn was a very sleepy town, the birthplace of Ludwig van Beethoven, and also famous as a university town. The second town wanting to be the capital would have been Frankfurt am Main, which we know as Germany's banking center. And then Stuttgart, if you have any, if you know anybody who's gone over with Daimler-Benz, that's the area there, and Porsche. And then Kassel, which is not on here, but Kassel was right about here. So the stipulations for the capital were that the city not be too close to a border or a border zone or otherwise, possible dangerous situation, and that basically the government be able to house the bureaucrats who would be in this government, and that they could afford to build housing and build the offices. And so that eliminated Stuttgart. They couldn't afford it. And Kassel, the one that's not pictured, had been decimated in World War II. So it really came down to Frankfurt and Bonn. And the first post-war chancellor of West Germany, a man named Konrad Adenauer, came from a tiny village next to Bonn named Röndorf. And Bonn won out. Bonn was also being advocated for by the Christian Democratic Party, which are more to the right, and the Social Democrats were more to the left. But anyway, Bonn became the capital, and Bonn was the capital from 1949 onward. And even after reunification, the government was still meeting in Bonn, but eventually they decided in the German parliament, or the Bundestag, to have a vote. And it's really amazing because Berlin just squeaked by with 337 to 320 votes in June of 1991. So not by a large margin, but they did decide to make Berlin the capital again of reunited Germany. And in many ways, it was appropriate just because of history, whether positive or negative, everything that had been associated with Berlin, but just so much history in this city. So Berlin became, once again, the capital of Germany. And we were lucky to be sent there, as I had said, in 2002. And this is the first of two diversions. And this is just showing you the inner German border after what Germany has done to turn it into something positive, because it was never something positive. It was pretty much, a death strip on the East German side, and okay, you could go up to it in the West German side, but they turned it into a nature path, and so you can bike or hike on it now, and they've got historical markers and information that you could read. And so something positive out of something negative. And then I always quote Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill had been the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, but in 1945, in the summer, he was voted out of office. He became Prime Minister again later on. But he was invited by our president, Harry Truman, to come to the United States and to visit a small town in Missouri, Fulton, Missouri. And that's where he gave this very famous speech where he said, from Stettin, which is in Poland, Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. And I think all of us know that term, and we still use it today when referring to the past. So everything to the right on this line would have been behind the Iron Curtain. But anyway, so kudos to Germany for having done that. So this is pretty much after World War II, what's happening. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, and Winston Churchill had already met twice. They had met in Tehran, and they had met in Yalta, which is on the Crimean Peninsula, to talk about what would happen to Germany after the war and to create the division. And we do have to remember that the Soviet Union was our ally. So this is what happened to Germany after the war. And the French were given this very small sector here because Charles de Gaulle insisted on having part of it and said that he wanted to be part of the post-war, just getting up and going again. And so this was Germany, what they decided. And they met in the town of Potsdam, so they couldn't meet in Berlin, these world leaders, because everything was bombed out. There was nowhere appropriate for them to stay. So they met in the town of Potsdam, which is, oh, and by the way, we'll go into this later, but right in the middle of East Germany, of the Soviet sector. And the Soviet sector became synonymous with East Berlin. And in the middle, East Germany, I mean, and this is Berlin right in the middle here, and that will have been divided in the same way. So they met in the summer of 1945 in this gorgeous Tudor-style country mansion, which was built from 1914 to 1917. The last Kaiser of Germany was Kaiser Wilhelm II, and he had 7 children. And when his eldest son married, he married a princess from northern Germany. Her name was Cecilia. And so they built this as a wedding gift for this young couple. Well, that's quite a wedding gift. It has 176 rooms, and they named it Cecilienhof after the bride. And this would have been Potsdam. Potsdam would have been East Germany. So if you had visited Berlin during the Cold War years, you probably wouldn't have gone to this building. Kaiser Wilhelm II, his mother was the eldest daughter of Queen Victoria of Great Britain. So Kaiser Wilhelm was the grandson of Queen Victoria, and hence the sort of like a British country house style there. Obviously, the young couple did not get to live there for a long time because after the end of World War I, there was no more royalty. Kaiser Wilhelm himself went into exile and died in 1942 in the Netherlands. But this was Cecilienhof, and this is where these world leaders met in the summer of 45. Stalin gifted this floral arrangement of the Red Star, which is still there now. He also arrived 2 weeks late. He kept everyone waiting. He just had a massive entourage with him. And as dictators are prone to do, he had his food was always tasted before he himself dined. And, dictators tend to be a bit paranoid. But this is Cecilienhof. You can tour Cecilienhof today. You can tour the rooms on the first floor where the negotiations for this final partition of Berlin and Germany took place. Or you can tour the rooms above, which would have been the living quarters for the young royal family. And this is an iconic picture that you'll find on postcards and on magnets. You can call them the Big Three. Churchill, who was again voted out of office, so he was replaced by Prime Minister Clement Attlee. This would have been during the summer break when they were negotiating. Harry Truman, who was really still quite green behind the ears. FDR had passed away in April of 45, and FDR really hadn't shared a lot with his vice president. Harry was not from the East Coast. He wasn't from the Ivy League. He wasn't the kind of, person with whom FDR was used to, hanging out is not a good term for presidential quality, but anyway. And then, of course, the very wily Joseph Stalin on the right. And so as they had divided up Germany, so they divided up the city of Berlin into these different sectors. And the yellow is what became West Berlin, the free sector. And the Soviet sector, again, was East Berlin and was the communist sector. And I kind of jump ahead in a little bit of my talk here just to show you that eventually when the Berlin Wall was built, this portion here going between East and West Berlin was 27 miles long. And then this portion here, which would have been, this would be all East Germany, remember, on the white here, it's all East Germany. So this part here would have been 69 miles. So a total of 96 miles of wall that were built around the free sector right there. And then the Berlin Gate itself, always iconic and always a symbol. It was in East Berlin once the city was divided, because the city was divided long before the wall went up. But here it is. It's in a no man's land. No one could go anywhere near it. And then this would be from the west, where it says, be careful, you're now leaving West Berlin, although I don't think anyone would have tried to leave at that particular location. But you can see how over the years, how the gate was just not in very good shape at all. And this is where our President Ronald Reagan stood, and he made that famous statement about Mr. Gorbachev, please tear down this wall. This gate, by the way, the picture that you saw at the very beginning where it's sparkling, when we moved to Berlin in 2002, there was a big curtain over the gate, and the ongoing reparations were continuing. And then on October 3rd, 2002, that was the new German National Day following reunification, and is still now the German National Day. Former President Bill Clinton was visiting, and he pulled some kind of a draw cord, and the curtain fell off, and then the gate, the newly restored gate, was revealed in all its glory. And this is a picture that went around the world on the 9th of November, 1989, once the wall had opened, although this is not the first place that the wall was breached, but I'll show you. But this is the, can everybody see? Is it okay with the lighting, the slides? We're good? Okay, just wanted to make sure. So this is the picture that went around the world. So the gate is 85 feet tall and 215 feet wide. And the royal family were the only ones who were allowed to walk through this middle section. Everybody else had to go through these side portals. And even now, if someone is visiting Germany, the German chancellor will, a head of state, will usually walk through symbolically the middle part of the gate. And this area here, not on the other side, but here, this is all a pedestrian area right now. And there are lots of like history lessons. They're always in 4 languages, so there's plenty to read and to learn about. And on top of the gate is the quadriga. This is the statue. She's very heavy. It's Victoria, and she's supposed to symbolize peace coming into the city. And quadriga takes its name from the 4 horses pulling her chariot. She has come down from the top of the gate 3 times that you'll hear about. And in the back, you'll also hear about this. This is part of the German parliament right now. So the first time that Victoria was removed from the gate, this is 1806, and this is Napoleon Bonaparte, and he's on his white steed, and he's on his victory march through Europe. He didn't, quote, meet his Waterloo yet, and he's being handed the keys to the city, and his soldiers actually took the quadriga back to Paris as war booty, and that is one heavy statue. So 1806, and Prussia finally got it back in 1814. The second time that the quadriga came down was in 1956 because the statue was so heavily damaged during the war that East Germany took it down and put up a replacement. And then in 1989-90, because of reunification, all of the jubilant celebrations that had been taking place around the gate, there was also damage done to the quadriga. So this is Napoleon right here. And then this would be at Christmas time, leading up to the gate, down the Victory Street, or the main street of central Berlin, which is known as Under the Linden Trees, Unter den Linden. And they have a symbolic meeting that you will learn about. Every Christmas, Norway gives a Christmas tree to the country of Germany as a sign of friendship. And roughly, I'm not sure when they started doing this, but in the last maybe 15 years, there's also the largest menorah in Europe. So this would be the holiday scene at Christmas time, or in December. And this is the Brandenburg Gate, not looking very good at all in 1945. But then I love the country of Germany, but you do have to ask who started the war. And it's just absolute ruin, and not at all what it looks like today. So the Festival of Lights takes place every October. So now in many cities around the world, the tourist season literally never ends at all. But traditionally, you would think, oh, the summertime is over, the Christmas markets aren't up and running yet, and then you have the Festival of Lights, which has probably been going on for 20 years, and every year it seems like more and more buildings take part. So down in the center part of the city, every building, church, museum, the Brandenburg Gate, there are all kinds of light projections. Sometimes there are messages. Sometimes there are video mappings. It's for 10 days every October, and you get a really nice October weekend evening, and it's just lovely to walk downtown and see. It's free, it's open air, and it's a great display. This was a postcard that I found with the roses on it. This is, so my talk isn't political, but this was a significant event in a way. This is our President Barack Obama in 2014. And you rarely see the area around the Brandenburg Gate completely blocked off. But it was on that particular day. He is the guest of Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was in power for 16 years. I also have to mention that the chancellor before Frau Merkel was also in power for 16 years. Those are 2 long stretches there, Helmut Kohl and Angela Merkel. She was an unlikely candidate ever to be the Chancellor of Germany. She was born in 1954, and she has a PhD in physics. So she had never intended to go into politics. But after reunification, she did. She was actually born in Hamburg in West Germany, but her father was a pastor. So even though East Germany was an atheist state, he was given a small pastor, territory in East Germany. So she was already a bit of a chameleon when she was growing up. She was confirmed in the church in West Germany, and then her two younger siblings, there was something equivalent to confirmation, but not a religious ceremony. So her two younger siblings would have gone through that coming of age ceremony. So again, just an interesting family. So on this particular day, I was very lucky. I was the registrar for a bilingual, bicultural school in Berlin, John F. Kennedy. And so we had some tickets to come to this event, but the whole area is cordoned off. They're up on a stage. It was brutally hot. The president, ended up taking off his coat, and there were sharpshooters on the buildings. And in general, at least when I was there, Germany had the highest security level for five people: the U.S. President, U.S. Secretary of State, the President of Israel, the President of Russia, and I can't remember who the fifth one was, but also whatever we call, this, I still say manholes, but anyway, they were all nailed shut, so, nothing could happen there. And it was interesting because during the Cold War years, the Berlin subway system did not stop at the East Berlin stops. Someone told me once that they stopped at one, but the doors didn't open. So there would just be soldiers with machine guns there, and then you would continue on to the West Berlin stop. But on this day, the subway stop underneath the Brandenburg Gate was also off limits. So it didn't stop there. So there weren't any soldiers with machine guns. It just didn't stop there. So it was a security measure. But so if you had been alive in the old days, it was just interesting to look back at that. And they obviously hit it off very well. She was always very pro a strong transatlantic alliance. President Obama had awarded Chancellor Merkel the Congressional Medal of Freedom, and her husband, who is a professor of quantum physics, a very shy and very retiring individual, he never attended any of her 4 inaugurations, but he did go with her to Washington when she received that award. And they must have hit it off really well, because while these two are sitting here giving a speech, Professor Zauer was out touring Michelle and the girls around Berlin. So this was a blistering hot day and a Brandenburg Gate in all its glory there. This is in 2006. This is when Germany hosted the World Cup soccer games. We all know that soccer is popular more and more all over the world, and especially in Europe. Germany had 12 stadiums around the country where the games were played. Germany actually came in 3rd place. This is the Brandenburg Gate right here, and this is the so-called fan mile that they cordon off for New Year's Eve celebrations and World Cup games. Here, you've got the giant screens, but just the show of patriotism in general, Germany they don't fly the flag as we Americans, we fly the flag all the time. But in Germany, just because of the past and having started 2 world wars, it's just not quite that same national fervor of display with the flag. But this was really wonderful for the month of July 2006. And it was just this lovely display of patriotism. The flag, the black, red, gold. You can get the little clip and clip it on your car window. You can hang your flag out of the window of your house, anything. It was just a really, really great month. And this is a temporary museum about the history of soccer that was put up in front of the Brandenburg Gate on that occasion. This is a really neat thing that was created for the 25th anniversary for the fall, or we say the fall of the wall. And in 2014, there were 2 brothers who came up with the idea, and they created a light brigade that followed 10 miles of the inner East Berlin, West Berlin border. And they're sort of like balloons, but they were a much more durable quality. And families or companies could sponsor them. And so they followed the wall through this section of East and West Berlin. Because, if you visit Berlin, if you look at history books or you follow, sometimes downtown, they have on the bricks, it says this is where the wall ran. But it's really, really hard. This wall was so meandering, it's very difficult to understand where this wall actually went. So this was a fabulous history lesson. It was a beautiful November 3-day weekend, just golden sunshine, and it was a big hit. This is the river that runs through Berlin. It's the Spree, S-P-R-E-E. So they were showing that. And then on the 9th of November, the anniversary, there was a VIP concert at the Brandenburg Gate, and at a certain point in time, the balloons were, quote, released, and the wall fell all over again. So as far as the wall goes, here's Walter Ulbricht. We can call it the Socialist Unity Party. We can say East Germany, Communist East Germany. In the German language, translated, they called it the German Democratic Republic, whatever, it's East Germany. And he was the Secretary General. He was the top dog in the 50s and the 60s. And he followed, unquestioningly, he followed that Stalin orthodox line of promoting the 5-year plan and the heavy industry, no matter what the, I was wondering if we could. I wasn't sure if is it okay if we close the doors there? Yeah, we're going to close the door. Thank you. So he didn't care whether the raw materials were readily available or how much they cost. He was out to fulfill that 5-year plan. And so consequently, consumer goods were always in chronic shortage. In fact, in the early 60s, when it became possible for West Germans to send care packages to friends or relatives in East Germany, 3 of the most popular products in the care packages would be coffee and chocolate or ladies' nylons. And so at that time, you could pass between East and West Berlin. You could work in one and you can live in the other. But there was a brain drain because eventually people on the East were seeing that in the West things were better. And so by 1961, about 1.65 million people had fled to the West. And this was a big problem for Walter Ulbricht, and he has Moscow looking over his shoulder too. So this was not good. So there's a newspaper that East Germany, it was the party newspaper, Neues Deutschland, the New Germany. And so on the 15th of June, he says, nobody has the intention of building a wall. Okay, this is on the 15th of June. And then I have to jump off to the side for just a minute because when we moved to Berlin, Berlin had 3 airports. They had an East Berlin airport, a West Berlin airport, and one in the middle of the city that mainly had served when the Soviets sealed off the city in 48, 49, and they created the Berlin airlift. And so anyway, they decided to build a new airport. The new capital deserved a world-class airport, but many things went wrong with this airport, and it took almost 20 years from the start to the finish. And it was a major embarrassment to Germany, which has always been known for engineering and technical expertise. And so they took this statement, nobody has the intention of building a wall, with Walter Ulbricht, and they made these T-shirts called, and they say nobody has the intention of opening an airport or building an airport, just as a spoof and a mockery. You could actually take tours of that airport, the grounds, before it even opened. It was crazy. And then also because Germany is well known for advent calendars, this was one of them. So we have DTW, that's our 3-letter IATA code, and the new airport, which by the way is now up and running, is BER, and it says an advent calendar, 24 doors that don't open, right? So anyway, but back to Walter Ulbricht, and he made this statement in June of 61, and what happens on August the 13th, 1961? Unbelievably, for the citizens in Berlin and the entire world, they wake up and there's a wall being built. And of course, the construction is all on the East German side. And here it is as progress had continued, and you see exactly what's happening. And here you see people fleeing as fast, desperately trying to get out before the border is sealed, and just taking what they can from their homes. And as the years went by, you could always access the wall on the west side because we weren't worried about any ideas coming over to the west. But the East always said, well, we don't want those Western capitalist ideas coming over to us. And so, in fact, down in the middle of Berlin, the tourists, you could go up on a ladder and you could peek over the wall and see the no man's land. But it grew grimmer and grimmer on the east side, and eventually, they would have had the death strip here, and it was a horrible assignment for any young East German soldier to be up in those towers and, have to shoot to kill. So very, very different on both sides of the wall. This is a picture of a young East German soldier. The wall wasn't up yet, but he's seen the writing on the wall, and then they put it on a postcard. So you've got the Allied powers in the back, and he's jumping over to freedom, and he actually made it. So this is 1989. You can hardly ever find a country in the world where you know exactly the date when it began to exist and the date when it ceased to exist. But we do know when East Germany was created. And in 1989, they were celebrating 40 years anniversary. And that summer, there had already been unrest in East Germany. People weren't happy. There were demonstrations, and things were just not, they just weren't as the East Germans would have liked to have it. But they were proceeding with this massive celebration in October of 1989. And here you have, this is Erich Honecker on the right. He was the last leader of communist East Germany. And then we have Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, who was pushing his plans of perestroika. He had had so many meetings, with Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher, and he realized those 5-year plans just weren't working. And so he was pushing the restructuring of the government and trying to modernize it. And also glasnost, maybe you remember reading those words in the newspapers. They were full of them back in the 80s. And glasnost meaning increased transparency in government. But interestingly enough, Honecker he never went along with any of that. He just didn't follow that line. And so one theory is that when the wall opened, all Gorbachev had to do was, wiggle his little finger. And like in Hungary in 1956 or Prague in 1968, when there was a movement towards freedom and the Soviet tanks rolled in and crushed any kind of hope and did a great deal of damage. He didn't do anything on the 9th of November, not a thing. And so I think in a way he's the one who's responsible for the entire demise of what happened after that. So on that 9th of November, there was a press conference, and this man's name is Günter Schabowski, and he's talking to journalists, and the East German government had decided to slightly ease travel restrictions for its citizens, because there were some countries, for instance, Hungary, it was very, very limited, but you could go with travel groups and you could travel to the West during the Cold War years. And then there were other countries that were very hardline where that wasn't possible. And for instance, I have cousins in Czechoslovakia and my aunt, and when we were living in Cologne at that time when I was young, my aunt who was retired, she was allowed to come alone without her spouse to visit us, meaning that was the guarantee that she would probably want to go back. But so East Germany was very, very limited. So he was telling, that there are going to be these travel restrictions that are eased, and East Germans will be able to go to the West. I don't exactly know how he phrased it, but he was asked, well, when is that supposed to start? And he didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected the question. He didn't have anyone to whom he could turn, and he said, well, I think right now. And that was the beginning. That was the 9th of November, 1989. And so the first place where people got word of it was just north of the Brandenburg Gate area. This is called the Bornholm Bridge. And all these rumors went around, and people started coming to the bridge and saying to the border guards, we heard that the borders are open, and the border guards didn't know what to say, and they called their superiors, and they didn't get any answers, and there was just a lot of confusion. And then the East Berliners said, we don't want to leave, we don't want to escape, we have our homes here and our families, we just want to go and look. And there was still no answer, and then the guardrails went up, and there wasn't a shot that was fired. So it was a very emotional, very jubilant reunion. Some of these people, you have to know, they hadn't, if they had relatives on the East-West Berlin side, they hadn't seen each other in 45 years. And even if they didn't have relatives, everybody was royally welcomed. And this is, you'll see this again later on, but this is the little East German car, which was called the Trabant and was affectionately known as the Trabi. It's not. So anyway, it was just crazy. And then everything started going down since then. And I do mention a couple of movies in my talk. There's one movie, it's kind of a spoof. It's called Open the Wall. It's in German with English subtitles. And it's the story of a border guard who just, well, it really is a serious subject, but this is kind of a spoof. He just doesn't know what to do on that evening. And he's a little bit confused, and so it's a comedy and a drama. There's another movie called Goodbye Lenin, which was made around 2002. And this is the story of a woman. She's a very staunch Communist Party supporter, but she's been out in these demonstrations in the fall of '89, and she gets hit on the head and she's unconscious. So she doesn't know what's happened. She doesn't know that the wall has fallen. She doesn't know that East Germany is ceasing to exist. And when she comes to, her children, because she has a weak heart, they're afraid that if she knows her beloved East Germany doesn't exist anymore, she might have heart failure. So they recreate East Germany in her living room. The son, he has a friend who's very good with videos, and they run old newsreels, and everything is just like it used to be. They even, because in the communist era in the stores, nothing was privatized, so you buy a jar of pickles, we go for Vlasic. Well, there it just said pickle. Or we might go for Smucker's jam. There it would say jam. So he and his friend had to find all these, different cans and foodstuffs. And anyway, they do a great job, but one day she is feeling better and nobody's home. She goes outside to the park next door, and she sees the title of the movie, this man she's idolized all her life, Vladimir Lenin, his statue being taken away, and that's how the movie gets its name. So it's a very poignant movie, but that's Goodbye Lenin. So if you were touring in downtown Berlin, this is a street called Bernauer Street here, and you can go up. This point of view is from a tower with educational information for tourists or maybe school classes, and you can look down to see where the death strip would have been. This is a section of the wall that's still standing. These are the iron or steel girders that the concrete would have been poured around, and there's a guard tower. So this is also a very, very interesting history lesson. This is going back to that 25th anniversary night, and this is Checkpoint Charlie, which would have been during the Cold War years the crossing point from West Berlin into the Soviet sector of East Berlin. And I never really knew where the name Charlie came from. I thought it was arbitrary, just like, like nice American kid. But then I learned that that it was the military alphabet. So if you, in those days, had left West Germany and you're going on the transit stretch, the road to West Berlin, and you weren't supposed to get off, and they would search your car, when you got off the transit stretch, to make sure nobody was hiding in your car, that you weren't bringing in any literature or a Bible or something like that. So when you got onto that transit stretch, it was Checkpoint Alpha. And then when you got off it and went into West Berlin, it was Checkpoint Bravo. And this was Checkpoint Charlie. This would have been the third border crossing point, and that's where that name came from. And this is also a very high-life tourist area with big billboards in 4 languages and a lot of history. And this is on that night. And this is just an overview to show you. It says 25 years of the fall of the wall, 2014. So you can see, so I don't know how the, FDR or Harry Truman or Stalin or Churchill, how they ever came up with this division between East and West. But you can see how if you didn't live back then, it's really hard to imagine how exactly how that wall meandered through the city. And so now usually so that was the 25th anniversary. This was the 30th anniversary. This is the gate down at the end here. And they had the sort of like undulating waves of yellow and gold plastic like strips hanging down where people could write on their emotions or what this meant to them, things like that. This is over in Potsdam celebrating 30 years with the colors of the German flag, black, red, and gold. So this is looking now, the Brandenburg Gate is down here, and this is going to be the main street right here called Under the Linden Trees, Unter den Linden, heading down here. Over here is where the Royal Palace had at one time stood, and this is a gorgeous cathedral that's still standing. So, and this is just also the same map. This is under the linden trees here. This is the river Spree that curves through Berlin, and this is the cathedral that I'm going to tell you about. and also where the palace would have stood. So when the gate was designed and constructed, these linden trees were not put in by chance. There's a lot of symbolism to these trees. So going back to the ancient Germanic tribes, they believed that the trees were protected by the goddess Freya, and she protected against illness and lightning. The ancient Germanic tribes never held court indoors, so it was always under a linden tree. And these trees were planted everywhere, all over Germany, in alleys and towns. And the middle of the town would always have a linden tree. The sap is very sweet and sticky, and it usually matures in June. You can make a honey out of it. It's horrible to park your car under a linden tree, but the ancient Germanic tribes weren't thinking of that. The wood is very soft, so it's not good for construction, but it's very good for carving figurines or musical instruments. And if you're familiar with the Wagner operas, Siegfried, the hero, he bathed in dragon's blood, but a linden tree fell on his shoulder. And later on, he was mortally wounded by an arrow that landed exactly where that linden leaf had been, so the dragon's blood did not cover that area. So very, very significant in German history. And now you don't hear it so much anymore, but more old-fashioned girls' names like Gerlinde or Friedlinde. And there are about 850 towns and cities in Germany that have some form of the word linden in their name. So these trees are very important in Berlin. This is an old-fashioned postcard that I found. These would be the trees during the Festival of Lights. And then again, I had shown that one at holiday time in December also. So unter den Linden, literally under the linden trees. This is a big area of tree. The Brandenburg Gate is down at this end, and this is called the Tiergarten, which means zoo, but it was never a zoo. It's a former hunting ground area for the Prussian kings, and then eventually it was decided that citizens should be allowed to walk there and display their finery, and now it's a public park. But I want you to know that in the late 40s, you wouldn't have seen these trees at all because they were chopped down by a population that would have been desperate for firewood. And so it is all, grown up since then, but very popular picnicking area. Way down here, this, you don't see the street, but I told you about the fan mile where the soccer game, the screens were, and it leads down to a column there, a victory column, which would have been destroyed had it been left closer to the Brandenburg Gate. But when Adolf Hitler was redesigning Berlin on paper to be called Germania. It was going to be the capital of the world with his architect Albert Speer. They moved this victory column, and so they saved it. So it didn't get destroyed in the war. And it symbolizes Prussian victories against Denmark and Sweden and France in the 1860s and 1870s. And so you can climb up there. I think it's about 283 steps for a bird's eye view at the top. And again, you've got Victoria with gold plating. She received a new gold plating when we moved there in 2002 to the cost of I don't know how many million euros. And so when the sun shines, she's really sparkling in the Berliners color. The gold Elsa being her nickname. And then at the bottom, you've got a panorama of the battle scenes. So back down next to the Brandenburg Gate is the seat of the German government. This was built while Kaiser Wilhelm was the Kaiser, and he hated anything to do with parliamentary democracy. He hated the fact that his mother and that he was the grandson of Queen Victoria. He wanted absolute power together with his Iron Chancellor, Bismarck. And so when this was built, his palace was all the way down at one end of Unter den Linden, and he wanted this as far away as possible. But it was called the Reichstag, and even also during the time of the Nazis, the Reichstag. It was very famous in 1933 because it burned. There was a fire. It didn't burn down, but it burned. And it's heavily suspected that the Nazi Party started that fire. It was an excuse to further crack down on the population and to imprison socialists and anyone they believed to be a communist and solidify their power. But it is a gorgeous looking building. And after reunification, now it's called the Bundestag. It is the German parliament. And there was a contest, and that dome that you see up on the top was suggested, and the contest was won by a British architect named Sir Norman Foster. And you can go up in that. You do have to register online ahead of time and give them your passport number. And then you can go up, and it's sort of like a snail, and they have headphones in 12 different languages. And you can go out on the roof and look around. And then you could look down into the German parliament, not when it's in session, but, and then around the base, there's a bilingual history lesson here. So that's free, and that's another great outing if you're touring Berlin. This is on the 2nd of May, 1945. This is the young Soviet soldier hoisting the flag of victory on the Reichstag. Again, they were our allies. We met the Russian troops at the River Elbe in a tiny little town called Torgau. And maybe, I don't know, we had come from Normandy, our troops were marching across Europe, and Eisenhower agreed with the Russians that they would be able to get to Berlin first. Again, they were our allies. We could not have won the war without them. But we do have to remember that the Soviet Union lost 26 million people in World War II. And so when these soldiers got to Berlin, they unwreathed wrath and destruction on the population that some people said was almost worse than the last days of the war. Everything from theft and pillage and murder and rape. I mean, there was no code of conduct. And so this is their saying, we were the winners, we're in charge now. And this is a stamp that was issued by East Germany on the 25th anniversary, when they call it being freed from fascism, and that they modeled. And this is another thing where you don't know the country when it was created and when it was ended. If you're a stamp collector, you hardly ever get a finite stamp collection of when stamps were first issued, and then not anymore. But East Germany would be a case. This is a really interesting picture of the Bundestag, the seat of German government, because obviously it looks interesting, right? How many times do you see a seat of government looking like that? So it was in West Berlin during the Cold War years, and one West German political party could use it for a conference, but never more than one, because that could have constituted a government, and no government allowed in Berlin. But then it was, Berlin was reunified. And if you've heard of the Bulgarian artist Christo, he and his wife, they are known for their very different kind of installations. I think they once put up a series of umbrellas in our Central Park. And they received permission to wrap the Reichstag for 10 days in 1995 with some kind of material that I read was recyclable. So obviously this was big attention draw, but it will never happen again. But it is certainly worth mentioning. This is Kaiser Wilhelm, the last Kaiser whom I had said he went into exile in 1942. And I just think it's really interesting how royalty has, for instance, his wife, she's Augusta Victoria Friederike Luisa Feodora Jenny, that whole long string of names. He was a very vain man. And this is not something you don't have to read all of it, but the point is, if you were in Germany and you're playing a Jeopardy game, you might hear the question, well, what is the year of the three Kaisers? And the answer is always 1888, because first of all, there was a Wilhelm who ruled until 1888, and it was during the time that he was Kaiser where Germany was reunified. And then the oldest daughter of Queen Victoria, I mentioned Vicky, she was married to Friedrich III. He came to the throne, but sadly he had cancer of the larynx, so he was only on the throne for 99 days. And then his son came, and Wilhelm, who wanted the absolute power and who had to abdicate in 1918. So the answer is always 1888, so that's just like a fun aside. This is the River Spree in the foreground, and that I had mentioned a gorgeous cathedral that I wanted to show you, which is on the left, and the palace is on the right. After World War I, there was no more royalty, but the palace still stood. But when communism rolled in after the Second World War, the communists don't really have any love for royalty or any symbol of royalty. And this palace was not heavily damaged during World War II, but it was detonated. The entire thing was destroyed to the dismay of the world. And it's partially been rebuilt now, but it's not a palace anymore. It's been done with private funds, and it's more of an archive for museums and for the universities in Berlin. So it's not a palace anymore. But on the left, this gorgeous cathedral that you see there had been a cathedral there or a church, but Wilhelm had commissioned this also as a sign of not only religious splendor, but of Prussian political might. This is a Protestant church. So I had always lived in a Catholic part of Germany before I came to live in Berlin. And we were up, shortly after we moved there, we were up on the Baltic Sea coast in the town of Rostock. And I went into 3 different churches. And I think then in the 4th one, I said to the man who was working there, I said, I don't understand it. I haven't found a Catholic church up here. And it was really funny looking back because he said, oh no, he said, not here, not since 1517. I was like, 1517? Like, what is he talking about? And of course, it was the year that Martin Luther nailed his theses on the door and started the Lutheranism. And so Berlin and this whole area is a very Protestant area. And this is indeed Martin Luther. And the town where he did that, Wittenberg, is about 2 hours outside of Berlin. It's a very popular outing. There's a great museum there with the history of religion, which is bilingual. And he also, by the way, translated the Bible into German. So he's quite revered. His Reformation Day is October 31st, which is, interestingly enough, our Halloween. So 1517, fast forward to 2017, that would have been the 500th anniversary. And I thought this, well, the whole country got a holiday on that day, by the way. And Playmobil made this little figure of Martin Luther to commemorate this day. And here it says, books of the Old Testament, the New Testament, translated from Dr. Martin Luther. So that's a tribute to him. So I mentioned that Berlin is the hole in the donut, and it is its own city-state, and then the state of Brandenburg goes around it. Because Wittenberg is in Brandenburg, they always have October 31st off. So Berlin was hoping that after 2017, they might also have this holiday. So people in Germany are really big about their holidays. Many of them are religious, although the Germans in general are not a very religious people. So Bavaria has the most holidays because they're very Catholic. They have, for instance, August 15th, which is the Ascension of Mary into heaven, or January 6th, the Feast of the Three Kings. Nobody else has those holidays. And Berlin has 9, or had 9, and everybody else has something in between. And so, Berlin was really keen on getting another holiday, but the employers' union was not keen, and so they nixed the idea of October 31st. But Berlin kept at it, and although I wasn't living there anymore, I have heard now that they are the only state in Germany that has March the 8th, the International Women's Day, as a permanent holiday. So they got their one more holiday, so now they have 10. So, but anyway, this is the tribute to Luther. It's an absolutely gorgeous cathedral. It had been also a bit neglected and dilapidated. Again, East Germany was an atheist state, but after reunification, they've done just a great job. And the price may have changed, but when I was there for €7, you can go in and buy a ticket, and you can climb all the way up to the dome and look around. And then you get, obviously, to see the interior. And then you go down into the basement where there are some a crypt for the Hohenzollern dynasty. So for €7, that's a great tour. And then right next to the cathedral is Museum Island. This is an island on the Spree River. There are 5 UNESCO heritage museums there. And by the way, this is in the background. This is the TV tower, which would have been built in East Berlin at that time. And this round entity symbolic of Sputnik, going back to the space race. And actually, when the sun shines, it makes a cross on that round ball. So in West Berlin, they would have called it the Pope's Revenge, because again, the atheist stayed with the cross when the sun was shining. But these museums, each and every one of them, is absolutely gorgeous. One of the most popular for visitors is down here. This would be the Pergamon Museum. This Pergamon altar is 35 meters wide and 33 meters long, and was from the 2nd century BC on the western coast of what is now Turkey. And this was the 1800s, when not only Germany, but Britain and other countries, they were bringing these treasures back, and there's this ongoing debate, to whom does this really belong? Well, obviously the Pergamon altar is not ever going to go anywhere. It's so massive. But and then Nefertiti is in a different museum. The sculptor who carved her, Thutmose, his workshop was discovered in 1912, and so Prussia signed some kind of a agreement with Egypt and brought her back to Berlin. And she's just known for the skill with which he sculpted her and her beauty, and she's also a very popular artifact to be visited there. I found this is a little bit dark, but this is how you can imagine the Pergamon altar would have looked in the 2nd century BC, with the people climbing the steps and the population around it. And then this is something that was in the newspaper that I read. Again, my talk isn't political, but I thought this was a great byline. And it says at the top, Berlin is when the most beautiful inhabitant has an immigrant background. So you can take that for whatever being, but this would be Nefertiti. Also in the Pergamon altar, they have part of the gates of Ishtar, which is from Babylon. And we actually, in the Detroit Institute of Arts, we have a small panel from this gate showing off Iraqi heritage and pride. So that's something else that's quite revered there. So this is going to a completely different time in Germany's history, and the dark time. And this is called the topography of terror. Everything I've showed you is very, very close to the middle of the city. This would be a piece of the wall still standing. And this is now an indoor exhibit, I have been told, but it's free, and it's all about what's happening in the 1930s with the rise of the Nazi Party. And it was specifically designed to be at the location of the Prince Albrecht Hotel, which was the headquarters of the Gestapo, the secret police, who were feared, who were despised, and you had to hope that you were never, ever taken there. So this is the topography of terror. This is what Nazi Germany would have looked like on, I suppose, maybe a parade day with all of the banners. And then this is the aftermath and what they caused, the division of the city. This is halfway between the Brandenburg Gate and the cathedral on Unter den Linden. This is called the Babel Square, and there's part of the Humboldt University in the back. And you think you're just looking down. You wonder, what are they looking at? What is that rectangle of light there? And then you see that it's a series of empty shelves, and it's commemorating the book burning in 1933, when the Reichsminister Joseph Goebbels ordered that all books not in line with the Nazi philosophy were to be burned, not only in Berlin, but all over the country. So this was created by an Israeli artist. And if you saw the movie The Book Thief, this is the story of that exact time. This little girl is not in Berlin. But so if you look at Berlin and Potsdam, where the world leaders were meeting, there's a tiny little town in between called Babelsberg, and Babelsberg is the capital of the movie making in Germany. His industry, and Germany has a very strong movie making industry. They even have a Quentin Tarantino street. And so this was filmed there, and they're probably movies that you've seen and you didn't even know that they were made in Babelsberg. So now we're going back to Checkpoint Charlie, where I had told you that it was named after the military alphabet. And usually when you go there nowadays, there will be someone here in like an American soldier's uniform and a Russian soldier's uniform, and you can get your picture taken. They want a little bit of money. But what I want to point out, and obviously this was a crossing, but it's no longer a crossing. But I want to point out this house at Checkpoint Charlie. It's called the Wall Museum, and it's just full of stuff, but I think the most interesting part of it is the upstairs, because they talk about anything that an individual will do to try and get his or her freedom back once if you've lost your freedom. And they give a lot of examples of escapes, which were much easier in the earlier days when the wall first came up, certainly later. So for instance, obviously this family had contacts in the West waiting for them, but he has built a zip line, and he was able to successfully get his wife and child and himself out on that zip line. This is one of the most fantastic and unbelievable escapes that took place. This is in 1979, and there were two East German families, and they had heard or read about hot air balloons, and they decided to build one. Well, it wasn't easy to build a hot air balloon with nobody noticing in East Germany, because everybody was spying on each other, and it was estimated at the country, when it ended, and you could go into the files, that 1 in every 16 individuals in East Germany was spying on someone else. And the secret police, they had that way of putting you in a compromising situation where you couldn't say no. So consequently, you were spying on your friend, your neighbor, your spouse, your cousin, And so it was very paranoid, unfortunate, sad society. But they managed to put this together. And so just think about this. They had to buy enough of this certain quality, lightweight quality, without arousing suspicion. They had to figure out how to bring the balloon aloft into the air, and make the whole thing run. And then when, so in 1982, you can look at this poster here. In 1982, Walt Disney made a movie about this escape, which was actually successful in history, except when they landed. These are two families. They weren't sure whether they had landed in the East or the West. Can you imagine? Just like what your heart would be in your mouth, like you're going to go to jail or be killed or what, or you made it. Anyway, they made this movie in 1982, but it is a little bit Walt Disney-fied, but it runs upstairs in that museum. You can watch it. And, but so people didn't really, a lot of Americans didn't know that much about East and West Germany, and so it was interesting for that perspective. But then they remade the movie probably about 15 years ago. You can see it in German with English subtitles, and it's much more realistic and much more of a nail biter. And it says at the bottom, well, it says balloon, for freedom they've risked everything, the balloon. So all these different ways that people tried to escape. For instance, passports weren't as exact in those days. So a couple could travel in East Germany and conveniently lose their passports and give them to, friends or relatives. And then they just have to say, we lost our passport. And those two people get out. If you were petite enough, you could be in a suitcase. You could be in the trunk of a car. Remember, the Beetle has its motor in the back. And again, in the early days, that it was easier. Things, not as much was searched. It was more people, the police, the East Germans, they hadn't really caught on to it. Some cars even crashed through the barrier. There were successful tunnels built under between East and West Berlin. And in West Berlin also, which had a big, big lake between itself and East Germany, there were, there's a picture up there of someone who put together a frogman's outfit and managed to swim over to the west to freedom. In later years, the East Germans couldn't approach the water, and even if they did, there were below the water this far, there would be like a sort of an iron mattress with spikes sticking up, so you wouldn't want to try to escape. Or I think this might have been a training film for the secret police, because they blotted out the Berlin license plate and they're showing them, make sure you search every car thoroughly, and these are people hiding in the trunk. So that's a little bit about the Third Reich. This is the Jewish Museum in Berlin. There was a Jewish museum, but it was destroyed in the 1930s. And then they commissioned, to have a new one built. And the architect who won, also, interestingly enough, in 2019, when you look at Rockefeller Center and the Christmas tree, and there's a Swarovski star, this artist received the commission to redo that star in 2019. His name is Daniel Liebeskind, and just the way that this design was, the nickname for it was lightning or blitz. You can kind of imagine a lightning bolt on that building. This is a very stark memorial right in the middle of Berlin. Our U.S. Embassy is off to the right here. Actually, before this was even built, we had embassy bombings in 1998 in Tanzania and in Kenya, and after that, the U.S. government stipulated that every embassy had to have a certain number of feet between the building and the street. So they actually had moved the street at that time. But these are some of the trees that I told you were all cut down in 1945. And this is about 4.7 acres, and it's literally called the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe. And so they are these concrete blocks. So I always say these people aren't really supposed to be sitting there because it's a memorial. But when you walk between these blocks, they're varying heights. Many of them are taller than you are. And the ground slopes slightly. And you are supposed to feel disoriented like the Jewish population did during those terrible years. And then there's a very small underground museum off at the side. So that's that memorial. This is the first thing I'm showing you that's not right in the middle of the city. It's called Track 17, and this must have been on a significant Memorial Day with the roses. This is one of 3 stations in Berlin where individuals were deported during the 30s and 40s. And first I want to show you that trees and bushes have been allowed to grow up along this track. It's probably about maybe 6 or 7 stops on the public transportation. So it's not in the middle of the city, but it's easily accessible. It's 24 hours, it's free, it never closes, so that this would never happen again. The Nazis were known for keeping very exact records. So along these tracks, they've got all these iron, it goes alongside the track, and it says, for instance, that on the 28th of June, 1943, 319 Jewish residents were deported to Auschwitz, which was the granddaddy of the concentration camps. In the beginning, only about 100 people could be deported a day because there just wasn't the capacity in the camps yet. Well, once Auschwitz opened, they could deport 1,000 at a time, and Auschwitz is in Poland. This is on the 3rd of October 1942. 946 Jewish residents were deported from Berlin to Theresienstadt, which is a concentration camp in the then Czechoslovakia. So obviously most of the people were Jewish residents, but the Nazis had all kinds of people, socialists, communists, if you were physically or mentally challenged. They didn't want you as part of the master race. And so this is what happened. And about 50,000 individuals were deported from this station during the entire time that it was in operation. And so when you consider that there were 3 of these stations in Berlin, and we all know the story, they were all over Germany also. So that's track 17. These little squares are probably about this big, and they're called Stolpersteine. And Stolpern in German means to trip, and Stein is a stone. So you don't really trip over them, but they're raised ever so slightly above the pavement. And they are now the largest open-air museum in the world because they are in 30 countries across Europe. And there are about 90,000 of them. And they signify the last known residence of someone who was deported. So for instance, here you've got, here was working Arthur Kroner. He was born in 1874. He was humiliated. His property was taken away from him. He fled to his death in 1943. That probably means he took his own life rather than fall into the hands of, he knew what was coming. Or here was working Meta Kroner. She was deported in 1943 and murdered in Auschwitz. And the third one, Charlotte, was also humiliated with her property taken away. So it's a very stark reminder. This gentleman up here was deported to Sachsenhausen, which was a concentration camp outside of Berlin. And then this man was in a police jail at Alexanderplatz, where they had the TV tower, and he was murdered. So the Stolpersteine, again, just everywhere. And sometimes I've been told that in school classes, the German child will get one name, and they're supposed to research that individual and how this all came to be. And then the last part of this particular chapter is our list of concentration camps, many of them in Germany, but some of them outside of Germany, and there are 2 of them, and they've been up for years, way even before reunification. And at the top it says terrible places that we're not allowed to forget. And the most, again, probably the most well-known is Auschwitz, and a lot of Americans know Dachau because a lot of Americans visit Munich, and it's very, very close to Munich. So that's a very dark chapter, but there are plenty of reminders. This is a little bit brighter side. This is the Carnival of Cultures that's every summer for 3 days, just celebrating the Multikulti, just the different cultures that are in Berlin, the very vibrant nightlife scene, and then the Turkish population in 1961, Germany's economic miracle was really pumping in that Marshall Plan money, and they needed guest workers. So actually the first guest workers to come from Turkey were to the Ford Motor Company, actually in Cologne. And many came, and in the beginning they could not have citizenship, but then as the years went by, they brought their families, and they're very well integrated. This is a completely different story from what's happened since 2015 with immigrants from other countries. But the Turkish population in Berlin is the largest Turkish population outside of Turkey anywhere in the world. And they're very, a little bit like in where I live in Dearborn, the Middle Eastern, the food, the cuisine, very popular, the gyros or the doner, however you want to call it, up at the top there. This museum doesn't exist anymore. It's a fast food museum, and he's a little sausage, but he's a curry sausage. And I show you because this currywurst at any fast food stand, apparently it's ketchup with curry and some secret recipe, and you either love it or hate it, but you'll probably come across it at some point if you're there. And then street cafes everywhere. Berlin didn't have, obviously, West Berlin was an island. They didn't have a beach, so they created their own island. And I mean their own beach, excuse me. So this is the Wannsee. During the Cold War years, this would have been East Germany. But this is a very popular beach that they created and imported sand and that still exists today. And this beach is on the outskirts of the Grunewald, the Green Forest, which is a massive, massive forest. Also originally hunting grounds for the Prussian kings, but now open to everybody. No leash laws if you own a dog. Very, very happy dog and owner. And then, this is interesting, Berlin was, so after World War II, there was a lot of rubble. So where were they going to put their rubble, right? Again, it's an island, and there wasn't really an easy way to dispose of it. So the Berlin Senate decided to have all the trucks, 80 trucks a day up through the 70s, cart this garbage out to a specific place in the Grunewald. And they built kind of a mountain, and this, called the Devil's Tower, which is now not in use anymore and in very poor shape, and I don't think you could approach it because it's dangerous. But this was our Allied listening post into the Warsaw Pact for radio waves. So some of our soldiers who were stationed there would have top secret clearance, and they would go up there for their 12 or their 24-hour shifts. This is, again, downtown Berlin in the summertime. These are the famous Christmas markets. Christmas markets are really big business in Europe. I mean, everywhere. Every city has Christmas markets. My sister has been on 3 Viking river cruises that start at the end of November on 3 different rivers in different countries that go only to Christmas markets, if that's your cup of tea. But, you know, the traditional German Christmas ornaments, the gingerbread hearts in the background, the grill. Of course, you're going to have something to eat at a Christmas market. And then you can even buy the ultimate guide in Berlin. And you can look over all your markets and see where you want to go. And I thought this was great in 2015. This is actually a map of the public transportation, but they listed every single place where there's a Christmas market and the opening and the closing date. So you can see what is going on in December. And then I thought this was great. This was I cut it out from the newspaper. So anytime you have public transportation, it doesn't have to be in Berlin, it can be anywhere. You're going to have pickpockets, right? They thrive on public transportation. So the police, they had this action, or what they did, and they went through, and if they saw someone where they thought that they could be an easy victim, they would put a sticker on their bag. So if you were to get home and you see that and you think, oh, you know, maybe I should have been a little more careful, you know, maybe my bag's back here and it should have been here. So they were trying to make the population alert just to the fact that, you know, that you got to be careful of your pockets. So this, if you say Ampel in German, it means street light. And this is a little Ampelmann, and he was in East Berlin, he was on all the traffic lights during the Cold War years. And obviously green is go and red is stop. And he's kind of cute, right? He's a lot cuter than the stick figures that you often see. And much of East German, and this is a resentment, I know, much of their culture or their symbols were lost after reunification. They were just not used anymore. But the Ampelmann survived, and he's very much a cult figure, and he's very beloved. And here you can see him on a soccer ball, on a mug, on a pair of flip-flops. And so this is an Ampelmann store downtown on towels. And I like this one because he's a sponge, and he's with the Brandenburg Gate in the background. He looks really, really kind of cute there. This is the High Flyer, which is a balloon. You can go up for 15 to 20 minutes and have a bird's eye view of everything. If there's any hint of wind on that day, then the High Flyer does not operate. And this is when I first showed the Bornholm Bridge. This is not what the East German car looked like, right? But now this is for the tourist trade. So this was the East German car, and I always have to read this part because this car, okay, so this was the Trabant, and it had a steel unibody frame, and the roof, the trunk lid, the hoof, the fenders, and the doors were made of something called Duraplast, which was a hard plastic made from recycled cotton waste from the Soviet Union and resins from the East German dye industry. So very interesting, but it was very durable. It wasn't not easy to get a car. You had to go on a waiting list, and you could wait for up to 15 years or longer. But now you can rent a Trabi, and you can be part of a Trabi safari. So you can go through Berlin so when the cities were separated, West Berlin did not have a city hall anymore, and so they chose this particular building, which is very stately in the district of Schöneberg, and this is where our President Kennedy, you don't really see President Kennedy in this picture, but he's up there giving his speech. This is, remember, in 1961, about how Berlin should be, the wall wasn't up yet, but he's still saying that Berlin should be a united city. And if you've ever heard that story about President Kennedy saying, "I am a jelly donut," where he said, instead of saying, so he said, you should say, "Ich bin Berliner," with no article, "I am a citizen of Berlin," but he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner," so he literally said, "I am a jelly donut." And he was already popular, but he further endeared himself to the population with that grammatical mistake. And here he is in the motor car parade that is going through the city. Next to him is the mayor of Berlin. His name was Willy Brandt. He later became chancellor, and he was responsible in the early 60s for warming relations between East and West Germany and getting, for instance, so that people could send those packages to their relatives, and very, very limited visits within Berlin itself. And unfortunately, he had to resign because it turned out that he had a man named Günther Guillaume who was a communist spy in his cabinet, and he hadn't known it. And then this gentleman here was the first chancellor of post-war Germany, Konrad Adenauer. This is a postcard that I really like. At the top, you've got President Kennedy speaking on that day. Freedom means being able to follow your own good sense. You've got that iconic picture of the wall. Our President George Bush, who was president when the wall fell. And then over here, Helmut Kohl, the chancellor who preceded Angela Merkel, served for 16 years. And in the background, Mikhail Gorbachev. And in the tower of this town hall that I showed you, there is now an exact replica of the Liberty Bell. In 1950, this bell was cast in Great Britain, and it went to the US, and it went by train through 26 cities in our country from coast to coast. And citizens signed petitions that Berlin should be a free and open city. And those petitions are still in a box up in the tower there. So that is up there. This is not in the middle of the city. This is out to the east. This was the sort of the East German, quasi-Russian war memorial. It's the resting place of 7,000 of the young Soviet soldiers who lost their lives in the Battle of Berlin. And if you had any kind of East German anniversary or military day to be honored, it would have been held here. You've got the Soviet soldier at the top. He's holding a child, and he is crushing a swastika down at the bottom there. And then these 16 blocks represent the 16 Soviet states and show the horror of the war that Germany inflicted on the country. And then the ends, one side would be in German, and then the other side would be Cyrillic. And very close to there is the house where Germany had to sign the unconditional surrender, this anniversary that was just celebrated or honored on May the 8th, this year for the 80th anniversary. And Adolf Hitler had taken his own life, and that was pretty much the end. So right at the end, I just want to show you two more things. When I had said that the world leaders met in Potsdam, this bridge was destroyed. They had to take a pontoon boat to get over. But this is the Glienicke Bridge between West Berlin and the city of Potsdam. and very famous if you ever read spy novels about prisoner exchanges. And you may have seen this movie with Tom Hanks. This is a fabulous movie, the Steven Spielberg movie, where we really did have a young pilot named Francis Gary Powers. He was flying over the Soviet Union, taking pictures. He was shot down, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison at a Moscow monkey trial. And at the same time, in New York City, we captured a Soviet spy. And so this is the story of the exchange of the bridge. And Tom Hanks is a lawyer living his life with his family, has nothing to do with politics, and he's sent over to handle this situation. It's a very, very good movie, and I always love Tom Hanks. And then Potsdam, again, where the traditional little town where the Prussian kings and queens would have their summer palaces, latticed with lakes, cooler than the big city. It would have taken them a whole day to get there by horse and coach or whatever. And then up here, Sicilienhof, where the negotiations took place that I showed you at the beginning. And the most famous palace is called Sans Souci, meaning in French, with no worries. It was the palace of a King Frederick the Great. This is the rear of the palace. If you were a guest, Voltaire was a frequent visitor. The language of the court was French in those days. You would open your doors and you could walk down here with the vineyards. It's not a large palace, but it's very picturesque. Frederick the Great was a literary man. He never wanted to be a military leader, but he was forced by his father. And I love this painting. This is on Museum Island, but here he is playing the flute for his guests at any given evening back in the 1700s. And the painter is Adolf Menzel. He's also known as the Potato King, affectionately, because potatoes were brought from the New World while he was on the throne. And he recognized it as a valuable food source for his population. But right away, people ate the greens, which are slightly poisonous and you don't feel very well. So then he thought, well, how can I make them realize that this is something special? So he had his soldiers guard the fields. And he thought, if they see that, then they'll know that this is something, and they'll want it. And then in 1756, he passed a law that the citizens of Brandenburg all had to plant potatoes in 1756. So he is actually, you will see people, right, putting potatoes down. And if you read the book by Robert Edsel called Monuments Men, or you saw the movie with George Clooney, that's another great story about this small army unit that comes after the war, starting in France, and they are finding all the art treasures that were hidden in incredible places to be for safekeeping during the war. His massive coffin would have been one of those that was found. He had a political marriage. He built a palace for his queen on the other side of Berlin, and he had Italian greyhounds, so he actually has 7 slabs next to his own gravesite, and he's got his 7 dogs buried with him. So, the Potato King. And then at the very end, 2 great chocolate shops back in the middle of the city, the colorful world of chocolate, the Ritter Sport, which sometimes we see in the US, they're square blocks of chocolate, and then a much more formal chocolate store here on the corner, Fassbender and Rauch, and they've got this great model of the Bundestag, the seat of government made out of chocolate. That one's not for sale, obviously, and then they have another one of the Brandenburg Gate. And I've got one last movie for you. This is a classic from 1961 with Jimmy Cagney, 1, 2, 3. So remember, the wall hasn't been, in fact, the wall went up when they were filming this movie, so they had to recreate the wall. He is in West Berlin. He's the manager of a Coca-Cola bottling plant. He's living a great life. The boss from Atlanta calls, and the boss has a daughter named Scarlett. Of course, it would be Scarlett. And she's in love at home with someone the family doesn't approve of. And he's sending his daughter to Europe, and all these Coca-Cola managers in different countries are supposed to take care of her. Well, unbeknownst to Jimmy Cagney, she pays his chauffeur to take her to the Brandenburg Gate every night. And she goes into East Berlin and parties. And in the morning, the chauffeur brings her home. And it's a great movie, all the trouble that goes on. 1, 2, 3, it's absolutely fabulous. And anyway, from 1961, so it's an oldie. So this one's during COVID. It's just a mask that says, I love Berlin. these are so in your city at different libraries, I have presented Budapest and Bulgaria, and I also lived in Korea, and then have a show about Jordan. But mainly today, this is my talk, and then I hope you enjoyed it. So.
Any questions? If you have a question, I'll bring the mic to you, and we can ask it that way. No live stream in here.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for a great, fascinating talk. I have a question, but before I give that, I want to pitch another movie about Berlin.
Oh, please.
My son made a feature-length romantic comedy that takes place mostly in Berlin. It's called Berliners, and we're hoping to get it played at the Michigan Theater, but it's not scheduled yet, but we'll see.
When did he make it?
A few months ago. It was basically released in this year.
Oh, that's exciting.
And it played at the Berlin Independent Film Festival and won an award there, too. So
And it's called The Berliners?
it's called just Berliners.
Okay, thank you.
My question is, in 1976, our bicentennial, I and my future wife were driving through Europe. Mm-hmm. We drove to Berlin through the American sector, and that was interesting because the car wasn't searched or anything. It was a little surprising. We stayed in Berlin a bit. We went through Checkpoint Charlie to the on a bus with tourists going to the Pergamon Museum and the Soviet Memorial and some other things. And then we also went on in West Berlin. We also went on another tour with other tourists. But and then we drove back to West Germany through the British sector of West Germany. Anyway, my question is, while in Berlin, there's a little park near Checkpoint Charlie, and it had what's the word?
Crosses of people who were killed?
No, it had spiked wire. What's the word?
Barbed wire? Barbed wire?
Barbed wire,
Barbed
yeah.
wire.
It had barbed wire around this little park, and there was a sign there in several languages. And I assumed that, and I don't think German was one of the languages, but I took the barbed wire to mean to be some kind of sardonic Berliner.
An art display, maybe, right? About their
humor.
city. Yes.
Sardonic
yes.
humor of some kind that, the park has barbed wire around it, and of course the city is surrounded by a wall.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Maybe that's
So
what
I wonder,
they meant.
have you experienced any Berlin humor, or maybe that was back then? 'Cause we've probably gotten over that by now.
Well, I mean, I never saw that. But yeah, I don't know if that would have been humor or just kind of a stark reminder of people, as to what they were living.
I heard that they have a kind of crooked humor there, or at least in that time.
Yeah. Maybe just, I guess you had to have humor to live on an island and in that situation, and just that such radically different types of societies. But it sounds like a fascinating trip that you took. Yeah. I never saw that park, unfortunately. Yeah.
Thanks very much for your time and the talk. When I was over there, I noticed, it was a few years back, there's a lot of East German kitsch going on, because it's celebrating like the Walking Man that you're mentioning throughout.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say, since we're trading movie recommendations for East Germany, The Lives of Others is a wonderful film about life in East Germany at the 60s.
That's another good one. And sometimes they'll have stores, like you said, for the products, the East German products that don't exist anymore. And they take the word nostalgia, nostalgie, and they cross the N off, so it's Ostalgie. So poignant remembering things from the East, but exactly, that's right. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that movie. Yeah, that's a real one that sends shivers down your spine. Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for like one more question. or
Sure.
So, do you have a question, sir? Were you raising your hand? Okay.
I have a very short question and a couple of comments on a
Okay.
short story about me in Berlin. My short question is your name Hungarian?
Very good. Hardly anybody knows that. The last name is Hungarian. Yes, yes, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, and my comments, I have two comments, and they probably will sound very strange coming together, which is I've been to Berlin quite a few times recently, and I find the city fascinating, but I also really don't like it. I find it, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I find it fascinating because there's so much to do there. There's so many museums. I'm a retired historian. For a historian, the museums are just unbelievable. And I'm working for a Jewish historian, which I am. There's no other country in the world, I don't think, that features museums which basically denounce their own country's history. All the German museums are about denouncing Hitler and the Holocaust and basically apologizing. I mean, every other country, their museums celebrate their history.
Yes.
Okay, so why I don't like it, even though I'm fascinated by it, and I want to always come back because there's never enough time to do. There's just amazing amounts of stuff. One reason I don't like it is that it's so sprawling, the city, and partly because of the fact that it was divided for so long. There's no one center. There's about 5 different centers.
Yeah.
And it's a little disorienting because most cities have one center.
Right, where the train station is.
Yeah, so
right,
in this way, it's like
Germany.
Los Angeles, except Los Angeles doesn't have any centers, basically. Secondly, I find even though the subway system is incredibly comprehensive, it's also very confusing. When you go to one of the subway stations in which like 8 of the lines are coming in, first of all, you can't even find the subway. There's these huge underground shopping centers, and you have to walk about 10 minutes to even find where the subways are.
Sorry.
And there's just so many of them. It's a bit confusing.
Yeah.
The third thing that I found disoriented is that the signing for a tourist it's not adequate. If you're trying to find a particular museum, you have to have a really good map. But I mean, these are kind of minor things in a way. Just a real short story. In 1976.
Oh, the same year. You both mentioned 1976. Yeah.
In 1976, in Bucharest, Romania, during the Ceausescu regime, I met a woman from East Germany who it turned out was trying to illegally escape. At that time, you'd risk a year in jail and your future would be destroyed. She was a chemist, and they would have had her digging ditches, basically. And it so happened that she had to go south because she was trying to escape by getting through Yugoslavia. Because Yugoslavia was communist, but it wasn't Russian-controlled.
Right.
In Yugoslavia, they didn't care where you came from. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you had an ordinary passport, it'd be obvious where you came from. So she had something called a West Berlin identity card, which for complicated reasons, if you had one of those, they couldn't tell where you were coming from. And anyway, she ended up going south. I was going north, and quite unusually, I went from East Berlin to West Berlin, which is really unusual for a tourist. Most went from west to east, so I had to pass, I believe, Checkpoint Charlie. I had to pass through the wall, and going through the wonderful, welcoming Volkspolizei, the People's Police, they were concerned I had a fake passport, so it probably took only 3 minutes, but it felt like 30 minutes. They looked at my passport and they looked at me, and they took 3 long looks, one for the eyes, one for the nose, and one for the mouth, to make sure I didn't have a fake passport. So all the time that this is happening, I'm about finished. What I'm wondering is, did this woman make it through or not? This is what's going through my mind.
Right, we'll never know.
Yeah, so it was really an unusual experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, there were a lot of stories, stark stories like that.
Thank you so much for being here, Maria.
You're
Thank you all for
welcome.
coming out tonight.
Yeah,
or this
thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you for coming. I
And hopefully-
appreciate it. Thank you.
Hopefully you can come to our next one when you
Yes.
do your next talk here.